help top leaders find their pathway to incredible success and a lifetime of happiness. Here is your host, Tom Dutta, the Quiet Warrior.
All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Tom Dutta, and I am your host for the Quiet Warrior Show. Exciting to be with you here today. We're live streaming across LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. And if you don't know what live streaming is, we're literally interrupting the airwaves, letting you peek into the studio as we tape a podcast and a future YouTube premiere. I want you to go and find the Tom Dutta YouTube channel and give it a like so you can get the premiere when it comes out in the future. And find the Quiet Warrior Show on your favorite podcast so you can like and honor our guest's epic show that we're about to kick off. Now, she's on the screen there. If you're watching this on video, I'll be bringing Leah Guy onto the screen into the studio in a moment. Let me tell you a little bit about Leah, everybody. Leah was introduced to me by a booking agent, and I was blown away, Leah, when I read this bio. Leah is an author, a television talk show host, a new thought leader, a motivational speaker, an intuitive spiritual teacher that got my interest. She's helped thousands of people over the past 2 decades to get their lives together. She helps people replace feelings of anxiety, isolation, and defeat with success, love, and happiness. And she has a new book out. We're excited to talk about that. Overcoming Toxic Emotions empowers readers to transform their lives. Leah Guy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I love the music that you started off with too. It got me all riled up.
Well, thank you. The guests don't know, but I see you, and you see you there when that's playing on the screen. I always look for somebody doing air guitar or something funky when they're waiting to get.
That's good.
I was reading something on your bio. We're just going to have some fun today talking about a bunch of stuff. And I think you have a media company, and I love the title of that company. It's the Girl Named Guy Productions. So
yes.
There is a lot to you. But listen, this is all about you. We're going to shine the spotlight on your work. And take us back into your story, Leah. Some rather difficult things happened to you in the early part of your life. And I always like to say that we can either be defined or shaped by those things. I believe from what I see here that it really shaped you because you're really changing the world with that. Take us back there and tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I think the only difference between me and anyone else is I have been very vocal and upfront and used whatever platform that I have to try to share as vulnerably as possible certain things that have happened in my life as a way to relate and connect and also to allow other people to feel safe in sharing their vulnerabilities. I think we heal and as we reveal, So I had, standard wonderful childhood by a lot of measures, and also very difficult things happened. I had an aunt who was murdered the same year that my parents divorced. I developed an eating disorder due to emotional disconnection between myself and some of my primary caregivers. Anxiety was prevalent in my family, mental health issues prevalent in my family, and I absorbed a lot of that behavior myself. I went through a rape when I was in my early young 20s, and addictions and a variety of other things. It's story after story after story, but I'm not here to tell those stories. But what I am here to say is that as we move into our self-growth and our self-healing and our commitment to ourselves, that I want to be a warrior for people to help them rise back up because it is possible.
Well, thank you for sharing all that. And, I always like to say that when you come on a show, it's vulnerability. Sometimes it's hard to do for most people. And I was reading again in your work, and you've been on something like 175 media outlets. So you've told this story many times over. First of all, I want to honor the tragedies. I mean, I just made a list here, the traumas of eating disorder, anxiety, addiction, rape, murder of a loved one. Lee, every time I have someone on the show, I always hear some of these things, and I think, there's going to be people out there watching or listening to this show, and they're going to say, that's my story. And when you can unlock somebody's heart, and the pathway to change, I believe, is the heart, it's amazing. So thank you for telling that story. You were in your 20s when you had that episode with the rape, and then your aunt was murdered. How old were you when that happened?
I was 11 when that happened, actually. Yeah.
Wow. We don't have to get into all the uncomfortable details, but with the aunt situation, were you present or was that just something that
No,
you learned?
she went missing actually, and it was a situation. My uncle came home ready for lunch. She had gone to get something else for lunch and parked her car, and she never returned. Some, two people, young people, killed her over her car, and we found her
Wow.
later, about a week later, in the ditch. And it was on the news, and it was a missing person situation. So
Yeah.
it was, it was traumatizing. The most interesting, well, not the most interesting thing, but it's fascinating when I look back at that now as an adult, 30 something years later. And I think about when I hear stories from my clients, especially when we're young, how we normalize so many things and we just kind of go, yes, it was difficult. Yes, it was confusing and, sad, but we don't really know how to give it the energy and the attention that it needs, and when I tell the story, when I think back to it, it's mind blowing,
Yeah, it really is. I mean, just for a moment to hear you describe that, and I can visualize. And it's funny because my brain is multidimensional. I go on these journeys. You'll hear me say I'm going on a journey in my head. And Leah, you sent me on a journey because I didn't know that part of your aunt's story. What was her name?
Carla.
I didn't know that part of the story. Maybe it's
Yeah.
in a book you wrote, but we have had, where I live in Vancouver, British Columbia, we have had these big matinee boards all over the neighborhoods with these neon images of a woman who went missing the same way.
Mm.
And they have, they're still investigating, but more than likely, I mean, they found her remains and it's horrible. And so to have to, people around the world who have had these type of traumas, I realized from my own self work that we're wired for our unconscious bias to think about negative thoughts. This is where I'll really admire the work you've done. So help us understand, first of all, when somebody's challenged with these type of traumas, identifying the root causes of some of
Mhm.
I call them thinking traps, and then give us some advice on how do you navigate and get ahead of that.
Yeah, it's a good question. So actually, I was on my podcast, I was interviewing an EMDR specialist, and we were talking about big T traumas and little T traumas. And a lot of people, can resonate and understand a big T trauma, like the one I just described, or other ones, in my story. But the little T traumas affect us in such a unique way. And I think, although it's important to learn how to deal and heal through both kinds, that so many people that can't relate to the big T traumas still need to look at and unpack the little T stuff. And the best way that I've found, and I wrote about it in my most recent book, is instead of focusing and projecting onto the blame or even the what happened, or understanding why did this happen to me and getting into the victim space, or just trying to make sense of it all. Obviously, there's a part of our brain that wants and needs to do that. When we get to a certain point after the shock, or after the trauma has taken place, or after the relationship, there's enough space where there's safety. We have to really take ownership for the way that we feel now. And that's a difficult thing for people to take on, because we are terrified of our feelings. We are terrified of getting re-traumatized over and over. We're terrified of opening a part of our heart again, or doing that same action again, or getting into a relationship with someone who reminds us of our mother or our father, or whatever the scenario was that was painful and hurtful. But in the work that I do, I really work to identify the core wound in a person. And I would say for me, my core wound wasn't the big T trauma. It was the smaller T traumas that happened prior to when my aunt was murdered. So when we identify what the wound is, whether it's fear or guilt or shame, then we can start there, because that core wound starts to identify all of our behavioral patterns and our belief patterns, and how we're operating, and our perspective, and communicating and relating to other people and ourselves. In particular, how we're self-loathing, self-sabotaging, negative self-talk, keeping ourselves small, all this. And it's often based off of,
You've
I'm
got me nodding. You've
terrified.
got me nodding here. I
Yeah,
got,
yeah.
I want to jump in. I so appreciate this. Everybody, that those are teaching moments you just heard there. And so what I'm learning is there's big T and little T traumas, and the big T ones are what we heard at the top of the show. I mean, you experienced rape at an early age. Your aunt died, and all these other things. But you just touched my heart, because my story, and I've put it out there in some of the work I've done. I grew up in a traumatic home. My father was a military commanding officer, and also a raging alcoholic, I call it. And Dad died a few years ago, and I made peace with him after a lifetime apart. And I didn't realize that the emotions of shame and those things you talked about were wired into I did a lot of brain work, my neural nets, or as thinking traps. Give you an example. I'll look in the mirror and I see somebody who's kind of ugly, and people will say, Tom, in my business, I have success, and I'll just tear it down inside me, and I can't accept it. I've worked all my life on those little T traumas, and I continue to. But I think you said something really important, and then I'll give it back to you on this, Leah, that if we deny those little T traumas, nothing else, we can't make any progress on the big stuff. And I think that's a big part of what got me back to having coffee with my dad before he passed. And what I found out was his father's childhood was the same. And he was living with anxiety and depression and dealing with all the stress of his own life. But to get to that point, I had to do what you said. I had to actually do a lot of self-work and acknowledge those little T's. So give us an example of one little T. And then I read down on your paper here, 3-step method that quiets negative thoughts and eliminates bad behavior. I got to find that out for our audience.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your story too, Tom. And
thank you.
And the biggies that you went through, which can result in a lifetime of, as you said, shame, which becomes very toxic for people very quickly. I think I was thinking this morning again about my family and just observing and witnessing someone, let's say, with depression or anxiety or any kind of mental health issues such as that. We talk about how we inherit or we genetically get passed down these afflictions. And what I really think it needs some exploration with people is to recognize not only how we absorb the behavior within us, but also the behavior outside of us that supports the negative conditioning or negative issue that's at hand. For example, if depression runs in your family and people then, have drinking problems, for example, or don't take care of themselves physically or don't exercise, and things that we know helps to elevate our mindset and our physical body. And we watch that growing up, eating poorly and not taking care of ourselves, but we identify with that something's wrong with me. And that's where that shame starts to develop of something's wrong with them. And now I have similar behavior patterns. So something must be wrong with me. And yet we keep the external patterns and behaviors the same as what we've witnessed. And now we just kind of become part of this, the energy of depression or anxiety. And that was a real struggle for me, and I know for a lot of people that grew up with anxious parents or mentally challenged parents, they are people with their own core wounds and their own wounded history. But how are we identifying ourselves in relation to them, taking on not only the issue, but their habits? And we have to really say that's part of what I call, becoming the conscious adult in our own life, really becoming honest and looking at things I can do to separate myself from that old belief system.
Yeah, thank you for that, Leah. I just wrote that down on my piece of paper. I'm taking notes here. The becoming the conscious adult. Another thread in your story, I was thinking about my mother, and my mom's still alive today, and I still have some work to do because there's some things that I have to talk to her about that just will probably free me from my past. The thing you said about the parents, my father, I think, and both my mom and dad, I know, have struggled with mental illness. I wanted to ask you about alcohol. So I saw in your notes that you suffered. It says I abused alcohol and suffered from eating disorder. What did that look like for abuse? Just quickly, was it drinking every day, binge drinking? What was that?
A lot of drinking every day, a lot of drinking to getting blacked out, a lot of waking up not knowing where I was.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
and
wrecking cars.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because my dad, the way my dad stopped drinking, sadly, is he broadsided a car with a woman and child and almost killed them.
Oh.
But my dad was found rolling around in hotel lobbies. He traveled and was a teacher, and there's multiple affairs. I wrote about this in my book, and my dad loved my book. He said he was 22 years dry in AA, Leah, when I reconnected with him.
Wow.
And the thing is, I found out he became a hero. He was doing what you did. He transformed the meaning of that, was helping other people. The thing about mental illness, I'm an advocate for it. It's a tough one. I struggled with, I think I transferred a lot of the challenges my parents had with their own mental health, but I really didn't understand it. And a few years ago, I was doing a ride for cancer, and I fell in a bathtub and cracked my head, and I was concussed severely. I've had a brain injury. I have double vision still, and probably 3 years in working my way through it. But it was the first time I slipped into depression because I ruminated at home wondering, can I ever work again? And I had suicidal thoughts, and it scared the hell out of me.
Mm-hmm.
And they sent me into cognitive behavioral thinking training. And I got to tell you, Leah, that was the first time in all the years I've done my work as a leader and teacher that I really understood that you can teach the brain how to have different thoughts. And I always wondered why this type of knowledge didn't exist in MBAs and boardrooms where I work. So that's why you're amazing to me, because a lot of the stuff you're teaching is what the world needs. Have you got your book there? I want you to hold it up. Let's give it a quick.
Yeah, of course I do.
And she came prepared. I'm going to full screen it there.
There we go.
All right. Read the title to us.
Overcoming Toxic Emotions, a practical guide to building better relationships with yourself and others.
What a beautiful book. Congratulations. That's your third book. And of course, I know I'll be getting a signed copy from you. Sure. I commit to leaving you a review online for that one.
Awesome. Thank you.
Let me pull you back here. I want to talk about COVID-19. We talk about trauma and stress. Listen, everybody knows that came out of nowhere. What I'm hearing and seeing everywhere is people, for example, being at home, isolated. They're starting to experience that maybe their spouses and them have a lot of problems. They don't get along. Children have had to endure all that. And this whole has changed everybody. That's a form of what, a big T or little T? It's
probably it's a combination. Yeah, combination.
What advice do you have for people coming through now?
Well, I want to say two things to that. One, to back up on the mental health that you just, very well discussed. I'm a huge proponent for emotional health, and I'm thrilled that mental health is getting more attention and more understanding and less shaming in our society. But we have to understand that every thought has a feeling, every feeling has a thought associated with it. And when our mind is challenged, we often have challenging emotions that have not been processed. And so I think what's happened for a lot of people during COVID is we live our busy lives with plenty of distractions, ways to control everything that we do, and enough ways to get away from the uncomfortable or sometimes very difficult emotions and feelings that we have stored within us. So those things come forward. You remove the distractions, you have, the mirrors a little bit closer, and we had the time and the space where we're almost forced to look at that within ourselves and within our relationships. So I am all for people and like cognitive behavioral therapy, so many different things that are wonderful, teaching and training tools for our brains and our minds. But I'm equally, if not more so, for people really learning how to feel their authentic feelings and give time to grief. Give understanding to what symptoms of anxiety and resentment and disappointment and those negative self-talk messages that we have, what all of those things are trying to inform us about. And when we take the time and when we feel safe enough, within ourselves to actually feel our feelings, then our mind starts to respond. And that's why meditation is so beautiful, but it's not just about trying to quiet the mind. It's learning how to sit and be present with the reality of what is right now. And when we can do that and become observers without judgment, without being critical, without trying to deny or run away from the way that we feel, and just be really present to the moment of our authenticity and our true emotions, then our mind all of a sudden becomes friendlier. It becomes softer and gentler. And now we have space between our perceived self and the reality of the fullness of who we are. and it's not as scary. It's not as prickly. It's not as hard. So even with the PTSD, for example, or big T traumas, one of the greatest things that we can do is to learn to sit in the space and learn how to breathe with the reality of our feelings, our memories, what's happening in our body and our emotions as we process the events. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think I read somewhere, is it you have a meditation uh, course or something? Is it there's an app you're on? What app was that?
I have a page on Patreon that people
Yeah.
can study with me, but I also teach on Insight Timer from time to
That
time.
was it. Because I use Insight Timer and I went, whoa, I'm going to go look for that. So I'm going to promise you I'll go look for that. When I started meditating years ago, it just blew my mind how impactful it was. And in my executive coaching practice, my background was a business leader at the executive level for most of my life. And then I decided, because of all the things I went through, that, I'm going to go and teach people. And I got to tell you, Leah, that when I used to be in rooms with the business leaders, I always kind of say it tongue in cheek that they would show up with blood on their shirts. In the cone of silence, where it's confidential, all of the big and little T's would come out. My wife told me she wants to leave me. I'm 30 pounds overweight and I'm drinking too much. My daughter said I'm never home enough. All these things, the board's having a tough time. I might lose my job. And when I was at the top, I was living in desperation. That's one of the hardest things, is you can't turn to people, especially in business, because of the stigma that, well, can Tommy handle it, or there's something wrong with him. And I was looking at your list of repetitive thoughts that you sent me, and I just want to read this out as a teaching moment in the show. Everybody, you got to get Leah's book. It's on the screen there, Overcoming Toxic Emotions. I highly recommend you get it, you read it, you leave a review. This will be in it, I'm sure. Career growth, mental health, relationship longevity, family dynamics, enjoyment of life, ability to love, reliance on addictive substances, behaviors, inability to recover from trauma. Hey, everybody, are you on that list? I mean, that covers pretty much everybody on the planet, and I identified at least 4 of those. And so here's the thing I want to ask you, because I'm fascinated by your story, and I can't wait to read the book more. Can you tell me, up till age 20 or in your childhood, I don't know much about that, but I know most of my trauma came in my family home, and then at age 12, my dad left, and we were homeless for a while, and I went into my career. How am I going to say this? The shame and those emotions and things, and what led you to some of your own traumas with eating disorders, alcoholism. What was it in your early years? Was there something that shaped you or defined you that way in your mind? Or was it the actual 2 events?
No, it was, as I said, it was more of a relationship, relational issues between, caregivers and myself. I was always, I would say, a highly sensitive person, and even young, intuitive, interested in spirituality and wellness and all that. But, and I'm a Gemini. I like to share, I like to experience. And I was doing things, for example, that were really touching my heart and that were important to me, and just, discovering life. And in a way, I felt neglect. I felt unheard. I felt unvalidated. Now, from anyone looking out and looking in, they would say, great everything, and that's the way it looks for a lot of people.
That's
and
right.
Especially at school, I was an overachiever. I was the head of this, head of that, homecoming queen, all of it. But in my private self, and the things that were very intimate and important to me in that heart space, and trying to share it and explore things and talk about things, I didn't have that outlet. And so it left me feeling very alone and isolated, and, in my room, and upset, and not able to talk and be free and converse and be supported that way. And eventually it led to me, every time I wanted that connection and that, validation or communication or learning times for myself, I would eat instead. I just started stuffing my face and then throwing up. Because the thing about shame is, when we feel it external to us, it's a very difficult emotion to believe, because it ultimately would mean, something is wrong with me. I didn't do something wrong. There's something wrong with me. Well, if I can control a situation and make something wrong, that I can manage on my own, then I can manage my own pain. So instead of it being their fault, and then something's wrong with me because they don't want to listen or talk or sit with me or what have you, I'm going to go over here and binge and purge and hurt myself, that I can manage and control when I need to, so that I still experience shame. I'm still playing out my pain, but it's not that ultimate belief that something is wrong with me and I should just die.
Yeah, thank you, man. I so love you and your story, Leah. It's again, you talked about in that last little bit there. Everybody go back and listen to that last few minutes, the being in your room and the shame and whatnot. Well, my place was my room. I remember in my early years, because of what was going on outside my room, I bought a TV, and my parents called me selfish because I used to have a paper route, and my money, I'd go buy things from my room, but it was my place. I survived, and I wasn't purging, but I was definitely at the 7-Eleven twice a week getting Slurpees and O. Henry chocolate bars.
Yeah.
And I was a chubby kid. I mean, I got called fatso and I was shamed by three of my family members consistently. And it took me a long time, even in gym class, I tell this story openly to get others to know that, it's okay. You'll be okay. But I used to go to gym class and stay till everybody left before I took off my shirt to put my jersey on. Oh. And then afterwards, before, when the showers were happening, I was always late to class after gym. And my teachers would say to my parents, Tommy's always late for class after gym. Well, that was my secret. I didn't want anybody to see what I looked like.
Yeah.
So I understand now. Thank you for sharing that. I want everybody to, again, get Leah's book and read up on this, that the little T's we're talking about, the little traumas, they're things you probably don't know about, that they're wired internally, and hope is there. There is hope. You can change. Last thing I want to say before I give it back to you is that I learned in my cognitive behavioral therapy for my depression when I had my accident that shame and guilt are pretty much side by side, but one has a completely different outcome, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if I miss my granddaughter's birthday party, I'll feel guilty, but I can lead to a positive action. I can call her and say, hey, let's go for ice cream. But shame is like I go in my cave and I tear myself down and I'm no good. It's just such a small shift, yes, but so hard to do. Let me ask you this big question in my mind is that you took your mess, turned it into something amazing with your platform. I mean, I've looked at your website. There's so much things you're doing to help the world. And I'm proud of you. What got you the resilience? Because there's many people, let's face it, like you or like us, that don't do that. They go on drugs or they take themselves out. But where did that resilience and what was the moment in your life where you said, I'm going to take this and I'm going to create this online presence or out there presence to save some lives?
Well, first let me say, I love that you called it a mess. You took your mess and turned it. No one's ever called my situation a mess.
I was going to use a harder word, but I thought, no, you be careful.
That's great. It wasn't, there wasn't a clear trajectory. I mean, I knew, again, when I was little, I loved to interview people. I knew I wanted to work in the media and have a voice. And I also was very interested in health and wellness and spirituality. So those interests were already there. And I think when the first school that I went to, I went at the urging of a friend in California who knew I was suffering so desperately. And it was the School of Enlightenment and Healing. And at that place, it was a lot about energy medicine, mind-body connection, meditation, channeling, a lot of things that even at that time, or especially at that time, weren't, mainstream topics, I guess. But for me, it was where I felt totally safe and was able to allow people to help me in the way that I needed. And it made sense to me. It made so much more sense than just talking about things over and over and, just trying to forget about it and just trying to take drugs to feel better. So it was very powerful for me, and it kind of tied everything together. And from that point, I just wanted to learn more and know more. And then immediately I started working with clients on a more of a physical body work way and trigger point and, even stress and physical athletes, that kind of thing, to learn about how the body works and how we store not just emotional memory, but all kinds of different experience and sensation in our fat cells and our muscle tissues and so forth. So it was all educational for me. And as I was learning, I was just passionate about teaching. Right away, I became an on-air expert, for supplements and wellness and meditation and so forth. So it wasn't, I didn't just sit down and say, okay, I'm going to transform this now and make this my livelihood. It just became a natural progression of, especially 30 years ago, this is fascinating. This is helping me. I know there's other people like me, and I'd like to help other people. I will say through that, I did discover, as you mentioned about being an intuitive, spiritual teacher, I did discover some of my own gifts in that work. And, I just began using them. So I think overall, though, even though we're sharing about our shame and guilt, I was very fortunate in some way, and I'm not sure where this came from, but I did have a strong sense of self from early on, and I'm very fortunate that way. Even when I was knocking around and, life was a mess, there's some part of me that
Yeah.
still felt connected.
Who do you think you took after that way? Your mother or your father? Are your parents still around?
They are. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say uniquely a little bit of both. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
amazing. You just had my thought go that way again on a journey. My dad, I guess I was doing a lot of reading on narcissism and codependency, and I teach us now that, as you said, you can transfer roles, right? And so I think my dad was the narcissist, but he was this gregarious in a uniform. My mom used to call him her little Elvis. He was a really good looking guy, played rugby, born in Fiji, British Army, commanding officer in the Canadian Forces. That was my dad. I hated him though because of what he did to the family. But at the end of the day, my dad was this guy who had a lot of drive. And back then I resented the military way of how he raised me. But today I got to say to you that the demons, I said, became my gifts. And today I can outwork people in the room and I get things done in work. People say, how can you work like that? Or if you get promoted over others, I say, well, my dad taught me something that I didn't realize was a gift. I think my mom, it's more the codependent role. I think that tripped me up in my first marriage because my first marriage didn't work. Today, I'm 25 years, wonderful woman, Italian woman, Anna, light of my life. But again, it all goes back to what you said. Everybody, I want you to consider finding the Modern Sage. I think that's your podcast.
Yes.
Podcast of Leah's. Certainly, I think there's a wealth of knowledge there that we can tap into. And good for you for taking all of this and creating this thought leadership platform. I think you're amazing. So I want to, as we move to wrap up, I'm going to give you the last word here, Leah. I want to honor you with 4 what I call leadership words. I write these down as you're being interviewed. I don't script them. First one is hero, or we could say heroine. The show is based on the hero's journey narrative. And you've gone and can come back as a guide to so many people. Leader, natural leader. I don't know if you know this, I'm sure, but you have this presence and you have this positivity, and leaders have to create other leaders to follow them. 3 is hope. You give me hope because I found something in your stuff here that I go, oh, shoot, I still got some work to do. And love, you are love. It comes out of you. So welcome to the Quiet Warrior Tribe. We're giving you an award. You're going to be inducted into the tribe. And on the screen, and on the screen, you'll see behind me, there's a picture. Looks like somebody I know. So I had these coins minted and made in the US. They're handcrafted and painted. And these are challenge coins. I'm just going to full screen me for a minute so you can take a look at it. All right. So the challenge coin originated in World War I, and they were used for community. So soldiers would carry them. And if you didn't have yours, you had to buy drinks or whatever. Today, they're used around the world to create communities. When I started my radio show, I wanted to have a community of quiet warriors, and not everybody makes the show because they don't want to share their story and they haven't found their path. So you're going to be getting one of these and joining the less than 40 a year, I guess 8 billion people on the planet because of the work you're doing. So congratulations.
Thank you so much. That's very sweet.
You're welcome. So we'll get that to you at some point. And so everybody find the Quiet Warrior shows. And when this comes out, you'll have a notification. Go to the YouTube channel for Tom Dutta and subscribe to it so you can see the YouTube premiere of this amazing interview. And Leah, we'll give it to you for last word. Tell us where people can get a hold of you, your book, anything else you want to say before you leave us today.
Oh, thanks so much. My website, leahguy.com, is where you can find most everything. I also have, as I mentioned, Patreon channel. If you want to study with me for $10 a month, we do meditations and moon ceremonies and inspirational readings and all kinds of things there. Insight Timer, YouTube, and social media is at Leah Guy Live. I just like to say to close that one, I appreciate your work so much, and thank you for having me on. And I think the message that I always try to share in ending is that there is no shame in however you feel and wherever you are right now in your life. There's no other place to be. There's no greener grass. There's no one better. And if you're struggling in any capacity, I urge you and hope that you will reach out to a therapist, healer, friend, mentor, preacher, whomever resonates for you. And I know if people do the work like my passion doing the work, that they are more than happy to connect with you there. So I just want to encourage all of us to get more support.
All right. That's a pretty funky background you have there too. It looks like you live in a pretty neat place. Thank you so much, Leah, for being on the show. It's been a blessing to have you.
Thank you very much.
All right.